Today, we don't have really a structured presentation as opposed to how we did it the first two. What we want to do today is kind of reinforce everything we did the first two, and then let Brett, who obviously was very successful in the field for many, many years, who was the catalyst for us doing this series of presentations. He really implemented all the things I've discussed in the first two in terms of how he closed business and then retained business in using chargebacks as a way to do it. He may add a little different flavor than what we did the first two. I thought the second one was amazing with Dominic, who's a wealth of information. I'm going to just review real quick a few things and then let Brett kind of go with it. Again, please ask questions. A few of you guys had some great questions at the second presentation, but we'll answer anything you guys come up with. Again, what we really wanted to bang home in the first two was make sure you understand the whole process from getting the retrieval letter, responding to retrieval letter, getting the chargeback letter, to doing what's called represment, where you respond, which is really a chargeback response, understanding that that could happen a couple of times. Usually things stop at that point, either a win or a loss, but if it goes further, then it goes to pre-arbitration, then to arbitration, and that's the process. You now have all the numbers for the desk, Dominic's whole support group who really aids your merchants in the process. And then last part is we really walked you through the margin part of it to make sure on the application that you're making sure you're maximizing or putting the pricing in above your Schedule A cost to make sure there's some profit there, especially now that you're adding much more service than you did related to before these presentations, and making sure you're asking the merchant about the refund policy and other things that you can help them at that point prevent charges from happening to begin with. And then if you want your merchant to get a fax instead of a letter in the mail, that's when you want to be asking them for a fax number to then email Ruben's department so they can put it on there. Some merchants find that really useful, so they have a little more time, and they'll remind you that the date on those retrieval letters and chargeback letters are not the drop dead date, but a catalyst to get your merchants to respond. So do not allow them to not respond. Remind them that even if they think the date's about to come or it's already passed, to still respond to those letters, because if they don't respond, obviously they're not going to win. With that said, I'm going to let Brett give you a little different perspective and flavor on how to use chargebacks as a way to get business, retain business, and get referrals. Thanks, Brett.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Good morning, everybody. Appreciate getting on. So this is more of just a conversation that we're going to have there. Like Brett said, it's not a very structured call. One of the big things, and you know, really, Brett and I sat down and when we were speaking about, you know, a series that we would like to run, and really the first one that came to mind was chargebacks. So what everything in these series should go back to acquiring merchants, making it easier to acquire merchants with more margin at the end of the day. And really, when I was selling, I was on the street probably for a solid 15 years, door to door every day, merchant to merchant. And what I figured out was, you know, I didn't want to go through the door and just say, what's your rate, what's your basis points, and cut them. I wanted to provide a service. I wanted to control my attrition. And to do that, I had to have another way of taking the pressure off pricing and talking about a hot button with merchants. And really what that came down to was chargebacks. And over the years, I learned as much as I can about chargebacks. But really what I learned was, you know, when I went through the door and I was speaking to merchants, you know, the first thing, even back then, they would say is another credit card processor. And I'd have to get to the point where I found the hot button and got them to open up to something that they don't like. And really what it came down to is, how do I get there? Through a lot of trial and error. Again, you know, all because we talk about it, you're going to have to go out there and try to get to what you can talk about, what's your opening pitch to the merchant, what works. So there's going to be a lot of trip ups. But really what it is I came down and said, you know what? Yes, we are a commodity. Back then, yes, it's about pricing and just lowering, cutting pricing. But really, what this business is about is providing a service. You know, if 80% of all your monies are generated through credit card processing, don't you want someone who understands the business, consults for you, to guide you through this daily process, just like you pay an accountant or anybody? And really. And from there, I'd talk about, you know, let's talk about one thing. Let's talk about chargebacks. And back then, the first thing I'd say is, where is your manual imprint? And they say, what is that? And I would say that knuckle buster machine that you slide across, and it takes an imprint of the credit card. And they say, well, that's under the counter. I haven't touched that thing. It's still in the box in 5 or 10 years. And then I would go on to say, that's your best friend. And I would say, well, then I'd go on to explain to them, how much money I would ask the questions. How much money did you lose in chargebacks last year? Haven't spoke about pricing. From there, I'd get the answer. I said, so if I could save you $500 right now, but you lost $1,000 in chargebacks, did I really do anything for you? All I did is cut your price in a little bit, but I did not provide a service. I didn't help protect your business. And they said, well, how do I do that? No one ever told me that. And I said, right, pretty much what they do is they put down the credit card machine. They say, here's how you run a sale. Here's how you run a void. Call that number if you have a problem. I say, and that's the problem, is they're not doing you any justice. They're not providing a service. We get paid based on, we don't take money up front from you. We get paid every month what we feel is a reasonable dollar amount to provide a service. You don't want to call into this 800 number where it's a ton of people in the chargeback department where you're not going to get professional or personal service. I'm here to teach you. And they would say, okay, explain it to me. And then from there, I would ask questions. How do you do business? Well, I'm a retail merchant. I take face-to-face sales. If the card doesn't swipe, I don't take the card. Okay? And I do deliveries, and I hate deliveries because I lose money. And then I would start dissecting and say, well, let's just start with the retail sale. Basically, if you swipe a card through a credit card machine, or you put a chip in, let's say, if you swipe it through and it prints up a receipt and they sign that receipt, you're going to win 99% of the time. Signatures are not the most important thing. As long as it's not a straight line or a circle, it's somewhat of a signature, you're going to win. Why don't you accept credit cards right now if the card doesn't swipe? And really what would happen is they'd say, well, I know I'm going to lose. Well, that's not true. If you have that manual imprint and you take an imprint of the credit card and you have them sign and you write the proper information on there, you are going to win. And et cetera, et cetera. And really what I'm getting at is we have not spoke about pricing, but I engaged them in a conversation. I engaged them about how to protect themselves, how to save money. Now, it would still circle back around to pricing. But at that point, it was much easier. You would be able to look at the statement and say, you know what? You're at 50 basis points. I'm going to bring you down to 40. I'm going to save you money. I'm going to show you how I'm going to protect you here. But more importantly, I'm going to be the lead line of defense when you have chargebacks. I'm going to be the person. I'm going to ask you every time you get a chargeback, send me a text. Give me a call. I'm going to track that for you. Or in Epic, chargeback information is sent there in the new Epic coming out. It's going to be much more chargeback information. So you can reach out to the merchant. Now, right now we just combined acquisition and controlling attrition and not cutting your pants on margin. 3 things that when Brad came to us, we wanted to talk about. We just acquired a merchant without talking about pricing. We just controlled attrition because now if someone comes in and says they can save them $25 a month, they're going to remember how you call them and protect them against chargeback, which is a big thing. Here's the hard part. What I just went over in a scenario for you is the way chargebacks were before October 1st, 2015. Now we have to talk about how chargebacks are today. But it's the same thing, and that's why we're running the series. Brad's going to start going over things like he explained how chargebacks work. He explained how shift and liability works. The next one's going to be about mobile ordering. Most people in areas do business near major cities or major areas where deliveries happen. So you can now tie back retail sales, face-to-face, chip and signature, going to chip and pin, and protection, deliveries and how to protect yourself using mobile devices or EMV devices. I'll tell you right now that is a big one. I speak to probably under me 1,000 merchants still, all in major cities, all do deliveries for 20%, 10 to 20% of their business, and they're all going to mobile devices based on shift and liability. Really what we're speaking about is formulating a conversation, and that's why we're running the series. Instead of going through the door and talking about pricing, what you want to start trying out is talking about shift and liability. So as we all know, when you're cold calling, one of the first things that a merchant's going to do is ask you a question of, what are you going to save me in basis points? And really what you want to say is, Something like, you know what, we could talk about pricing. I can save you basis points, but if I could save you on your rate. If I'm not providing you a service, what am I really doing for you? You almost want to, I would say, the industry has become a commodity. How many calls do you get a day? Does anybody ever talk about saving you money on chargebacks, explaining shift and liability? Yes, they talk about giving you a verbal that can accept a chip, but are they going past that? Are they explaining you the chargeback process? Mr. or Mrs. Merchant, how much do you hate it that you turn on your lights, you pay your utilities, you pay your rent, you buy your product, you pay for people to work for you, and then someone comes in and buys a product and then leaves and then charges it back for either fraud or services were not rendered. And really, that's what we want to talk about. How do we protect you there? And those are the things that these series are going to go over. It's not only about sending a sales draft in, Mr. or Mrs. Merchant. If I own a furniture store, as an example, or some other business where I'm providing a service, is that chargeback for fraud or shift in liability, or is it for services were not rendered? And if services were not rendered, or because you send the sales draft in signed, doesn't do anything for you. You have to answer the reason those services were not rendered. And those are things that we're going to go over in these series, but it's how I want people to start thinking, bringing back margin from not talking about margin, controlling attrition, and providing a service at the end of the day.
So let me just reinforce a little bit of what Brett just talked about. When I speak to any merchant, I tell them two things, and this just, again, reinforces what Brett said in a little different way. Obviously, pricing always gets brought up first. I always convey to them that we can always save people money. It's just a question of how much. I tout our economies of scale because of the size of our company, and we'll always be able to save money. It's just a matter of where you're set up now and how much we'll save you. But just as importantly, and it took me years to really think this was as important, I tell them, this is why I'm different than the next guy that you speak to. You're going to have my number. I'm going to be in communication with you, and there's lots of different things and lots of different reasons. I may not have to speak to you for 6 months, but something's going to come up, and you're going to know you're going to be able to call me instead of a 1-800 number that they don't know you. Most salespeople do the sale, and you never hear from them again. This is why I'm different. Now, that's conceptual, but now in these series, you're going to have actual things to show them. In this case, I would say chargebacks is one of those reasons, one of those services that I provide that really most people in the sales force do not. And then I'm going to walk them through an example of how I help someone with a chargeback, either on a preventative basis or in fighting one. And that's how you're going to change the whole dynamic of your relationship with your leads and your merchants. And again, just to hit home, the 4 things we're going to keep showing you is it's going to help you get business, retain business, have another reason to ask for referrals, and just as importantly, help you add margin in lots of areas where people never thought of. And again, that's how you're going to tie all these different series together. If you go back now and listen to the margin webinar, it's going to tie into what we talked about in chargebacks, and all these things are going to build upon each other and make you a more effective salesperson in the end. Next one we're going to do is PCI. We're going to walk through a series of 3 presentations for that and show you the same thing. We're going to product and learn about that, but I know most people don't do much with PCI. We're going to show you, believe it or not, how it's going to help you get business, retain business, get referrals, and increase margin as well. One last example before we close. I had someone at an old company I used to work at in this business. I helped him with PCI, and then I lost touch with him when I came over here. He called me literally when his PCI expired and he had to redo it. He said, Brad, you helped me with this, so I want to give you the business. And I got the account because I took the time to help him and show him how to register and go through the survey. So that's a great example, I think.
And I just want to bring it back to one of the main things on chargebacks. It's, yes, you got to educate yourself, but the main goal of chargebacks, besides for providing the service, is to get you around the pricing thing. It's to get you through the door and having a conversation about something that's not just strictly pricing. It's about providing a service and saving people money. And that's the main thing. You have to work on, your 2-minute opening statement to the merchants and how you're going to do it. How are you going to go into chargebacks? You got to try it. When they say, what's your rate? It's got to be stuff like, we can talk about it, but really what I want to talk to you about is chargeback. The big thing today is chargeback liability, shift in liability, and what I can do to cut your chargebacks, and then go right into it. You want to get through the door without just talking about pricing. And then, of course, service and stuff comes into it. Here's the thing about it, and Ken Jay's going to asking a good question. Technology is changing. The technology is driving how chargebacks are handled today. There is a cost for it. Some solutions are better than the next solutions, but this is where the industry is going. Technology is going to dictate how chargebacks are handled. And for this question, if the cardholder doesn't swipe an EMV and you use the manual swiper to get a signature, then you have to key it in. How would that be proof? I thought the banks don't accept the manual swipe transaction. But I will tell you right now, Discover already released that they're doing away with imprints. MasterCard and Visa and American Express have not released that yet, but Discover has. I'm sure they will follow. The bottom line is that if a card does not swipe right now, and by the way, let's be clear, you also have a lot of flat cards, right? First of all, it shouldn't be swiped because most cards have a chip on them. So if the chip, rule number one, the chip goes into the machine, you reach the chip at that point. If it prints out and you sign it or it asks for a PIN and it's for a chargeback for shift and liability, at that point, you would be protected 99% of the time. If you put the chip in and the chip fails, that information is coded within the transaction. Even though that was the highest form of protection, if you swipe the card through and sign it, you would win if it's for shift and liability because the chip failed at the point of the terminal, and then you'd be protected because it would fall back to the second most secure way, which is swipe and signature. Now, to answer your question, if I'm a retail merchant and I deliver something and I key in the transaction, at that point, here's where it gets tricky. Right now, imprints are still accepted. Let's be clear. Right now, if I key in a transaction and I take an imprint of that card and I sign that card, and I have the proper information on the imprint slip, that is the authorization, what the product is, you are still covered currently right now.
But guys, one just follow up. The biggest example is a takeaway from, it's an extension of Ken's question that I see in the field. When someone has EMV technology and they put the chip in and it fails, merchants are used to in the past before EMV that they would just key it in. That you need to educate your merchants not to do that, especially if they don't know the customer, because that's normally the case where that may be a counterfeit card where they could not, that's why the chip wasn't working. Do not just key it in unless it's a customer they really know and it's a dollar amount that they're comfortable with. The biggest red flag that I see is chip doesn't work, they key it in, and if it's a dollar amount that's out of the norm and a customer they're not used to, that's where you see fraud a lot, and that's where they're going to lose. So that's a great example of a good tip to give your merchants to help them. You added value, and you'll either get business from talking about people about that or retain business because of it.
And that goes back to where you really want to formulate what we're doing, because the rules are not as simple as they were a few years back. They are changed. It's a good point Brad makes that you do have counterfeiters counterfeiting chips and magnetic stripe more today than ever, and it gets very hairy.
So my point, Brad, is in the past when it was just a stripe on the back to swipe, it would get worn out, and maybe I'll just key it in. In the past, that was fine, but that changed at the EMV, and that's the biggest thing that a lot of merchants still don't realize. So it's just one example, but again, those are the kind of conversations you want to have with them, and you'll add a lot of value with them.
Hey, Ken, remember, to follow up is, yes, don't forget, you're never going to change how a merchant does business. You can never change and say, don't do business that way. You can give suggestions. You can give enhancements to make it better. So, yes, on busier places, at that point, guess what? They may just key it in if it's not swiping, but, that may be a point where you have to think outside the box and say, if you want, line speed, you may want to go to a terminal that accepts also, Apple Pay and things like that. And besides the EMV, where you can still move the lines quicker and you are covered for chargeback. So you have to think outside the box. You have to sit down and think about How are you going to speak to merchants?
But now you're letting your customers make good business decisions, and you're helping them make them. Again, the two examples I gave you last time was my big parking garage guy. He's willing to eat chargebacks right now because the cost of changing technology is way more than the amount of chargebacks he's getting. But that was a great conversation to have. Again, we landed a big retail operation with 20 locations. They're willing to key in cards where EMV is not working on a customer they really know, where the average ticket's $30. But I help them put a policy in now when that happens. If it's over $100 and it's a customer they don't know, they're not going to do it. And that was a good business decision by them, and we helped them make that, and they really appreciate it. So those are just examples that just change your whole dynamic of your relationship with the customer.
You know what I really wanted to drive back about this, because we could talk about this for hours, just so much, is really working on, how you're going to talk to merchants, how you're going to speak to them, how you're going to start the conversation. And, if you're out there cold calling or even telemarketing, whatever it is, and, the first thing the merchant's going to ask is about, what's your rate? It's really about how are you going to get to the point of talk about chargebacks. Don't forget, you're going to become somewhat of an expert over time. The big thing is to absorb keywords and understand how certain situations work. And how are you going to talk about it? If I'm talking to a liquor store, what am I going to talk to the liquor store about shift and liability? Most liquor stores today have EMV, right? They've already done that. So what's the next thing? Great, I see that you have EMV, but how are you with protecting yourself on deliveries? So that's a big thing. How do you handle people you know as customers versus, daily deliveries?
So that's a basic conversation, again, that you're having, that the next guy's only trying to undercut you in price, and they're not going to leave because you're helping them with that. And then you're letting your merchants make good business informed decisions. The other thing I just want to leave with is, again, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when sales slows and you don't have as much to do, it's a great time to do a campaign on these things and go to your book of business and your leads and call them on this and have a discussion. And it's a reason to call them instead of just calling them to say hello. And it's a way to then hopefully generate more business than why you called them. Sometimes people say, oh, I'm glad you called. I just opened a new location. Oh, I got a friend. I mean, I just went back to install a terminal for EMV at a dental office, and the office manager, while I was there, gave me a lead that I closed. So again, these are great campaigns to touch and get in front of your leads and your merchants again.
We're gonna leave off here. We appreciate everybody. This is just information we're passing back to help you speak to merchants. Definitely review the information on Epic. You'll see the prior calls. There's going to be more. I think the next one we're going to do in this series is going to be just about what we spoke about today, is deliveries. How do I talk about EMV and bring merchants who do deliveries in there to protect me? We have multiple different solutions out there, and you have to understand, free solutions are not the best solutions. They're free because they're for merchants who really don't process credit cards. I do like 2.5 transactions a month, Square-based merchants. There are more sturdy EMV solutions like USA ePay. The readers are more money, but they're made for high transaction merchants. So again, we appreciate everybody. This was good information. Any questions you have?
You have the Pro DEV email that we put into all these presentations. They're in the slide deck. The next series of 3 is going to be on PCI. That's going to come out in the first or second week in June, so please look for those. Thank you.
All right, guys, appreciate it. Have a great day.